Okay, welcome back to the channel. This is the third video in the series that you can see up above, where we've been covering Vite, Vue, Pinia, and we are going to move on to Supabase. Hopefully we'll squeeze it in, and let's go back to where we started. And this is what we said we were going to do. Vite, Vue, we've already done Vitest. We have a basic store for keeping track of the state in the wizard, but now we're going to add so we have Pina for the wizard, and then we're going to add Pina, P-I-N-O, I've got my I, Pina for a user store. And so that'll keep track of the user information and the authentication state of the user. So we're going to have to make a few changes to the app. And like I said, I'm hoping to squeeze in setup and configuration of Supabase, along with, at a minimum, Supabase authentication or account creation. But I want to keep this under an hour, so it's going to be hard. So let's get to it. First of all, please make sure you like and subscribe. Subscribing is really important to me. For those of you who are subscribed, you know I'm making a heavy push on my account to try to create a lot of content and try to at least get up to 5,000 subscribers. Maybe even more, hopefully. So let's get to it. So as we last left it, we are able to get through our wizard. Fine. We've written a bunch of tests, how to test the form, and some tests to test our existing store. So we're not going to do any tests in this video. We'll push the test to the next video because I want to get a bunch of features in this time. So the first thing that we need to do is we don't have a router inside of our application because, as you see, we just jump straight into our wizard. But the reality is our wizard belongs inside of a createAccount page. So at a minimum, we need createAccount page and we need a login page. So we're going to quickly put that together. It's pretty straightforward Vue stuff, so I'm going to kind of go pretty fast. And so let's go to it. So we have our components. Let's create a views. And then inside of here, we're going to create account page. And the other thing I'm going to do, because a lot of people have, the topic has come up, I'm going to start using JavaScript, straight JavaScript right now, and not TypeScript. And what I'll do is I will update all of the source code for the first two videos to just make sure they're JavaScript compatible, to make sure that this video series is more beginner friendly. So let's just say view, and we know we need that page, and then we'll make another one, login page. So those are our two pages, and then what we'll do is we'll look at our wizard. So let's go to our component, and we know that one is step 2. Sorry, it gets email address and password, which is basically what we need for our login form. So we're going to copy this code, and we're going to go to our login page, and we're going to drop that code in here. And so what that will allow us to do is just, let's give us some more space. It will allow us to just take most of the code that's there already, login page. And as you can see, it's already got the handle submit for the basic form. It will give us our email address. We're going to change this because we don't want to use a store. So what we're going to say is credentials. And then down here, we'll say credentials. So what we're doing is we're going to create a JavaScript object that will hold the email and password. And for here, we're just going to create a function called do login. So let's get rid of this button. We don't need it. And we're going to say login. Okay, and then we'll go down here. And so we're going to remove this. So let me just start clearing some of this stuff out. Remember, we're calling this do login and called when logging in. And let's delete that. Email password. So we'll get the two values off the element, and then here, this is where we're gonna, so let's do this now. And use AuthStore. So let's go, so AuthStore, And so let's go over and where's our store? So let's copy, paste our store, rename this to AuthStore, and then let's go, since we have our AuthStore, let's take a look at it. So this, let's redefine this, the AuthStore, use AuthStore, and then we don't need this. And actually for now, I don't think there's anything in here that we actually do need, so let's take all of this out. And we know that we're going to need a login function, and then we probably want to get our user. And then is logged in, which will give us our login state. Is logged in. And so let's create these variables. So we'll say const login, and we're going to say email, password are the variables that we need. And then in here, we'll just say return null. Because this is where we're going to end up putting our Supabase code to actually log us in with Supabase. And then we know this will be async. And that's our login function that we're returning. And then up top here, let's do const user. This will be our user object, and we'll just make this a ref. We'll set it to null. We have another ref, which is logged in, which is a ref, and we will set that to false initially. And so this is our user store. And as you know, this will be our action that we can call from our store. And source view, we're going to copy this. I've never changed a project from TypeScript to JavaScript in the middle of it. So if this goes sideways, I will pause the video, get it straight, and then return. So, okay. So we have our AuthStore in place, and so let's connect that to my login view. And so AuthStore, use AuthStore, and let's import that and login. And I can't get to my page, so I haven't connected my router. So let's put my router in. But so you can see, I have my login. I have my login in place. Maybe what we'll do is we'll force a user into Supabase and just get the login going. But as I said, our createAccount page is really just going to render our wizard. So we can go to app view. We can pretty much take this because we're going to change app view and put this in our createAccount page. And let's take that language off. And let's, the components will be back up a whole one. Let me just make sure. And now let's get to the router so we can actually get the pages going and we know if it's working. So nothing special on the router, just using your everyday Vue-Router, or sorry, it's router view. Our router view goes there. Let's take this language off. And then we need to go into our main. And in our main, we need a router. I'm going to try to keep this. How many routes do we have? We have our login page, or createAccount page, and then we'll have a home page. So for now, I'm just going to put my router right inside of here. So actually no, because it's going to get crazy real quick. So I'm going to create a separate file for my router. And then we know we have some imports, and we're going to need them. And then I'm also going to need to npm install Vue-Router. Okay. We have that there. Now we actually need to create the routes that we are going to use. And the routes need to go into their own variable. And we'll start like that, because we know we're going to create a home path. We haven't created that component yet, but we know we're going to have that. And then we know that we need a login, and that route will be called login, and we know that we will need a component for that, and that component will be called login also. And so let's start importing. So let's import login from Vuejs slash login page, and then we also know we're gonna need our create account page also. I'm trying to get better with my keyboard. We'll see how I do. This is create account view, and then let's go down here and copy this and create account and set the name create. I'm going to do that, and then come down here, and the component is create account. And so now we have our routes in place that we're going to use. And next we need to create a router object using those routes that we just created. And then we need to export it. So now we've exported a default router. We can go back to main, and then in main we actually first of all we need to import it. So let's import router from router.js, and then we need to use the router. And okay, now maybe we can see what this is complaining about. What did I do? Is there something wrong in my router file? Oh, file does not exist. Create account. Use. Oh, that's what's wrong. So rename, and also, so let's go back. And so that kind of cleans everything up. So now that I've got that spelling right, if you go back to main, what is this saying? Can't find declaration for module router. So why isn't Vite complaining? Let's see. Create account page view does not provide export name create account. Yeah, these are default exports. I don't know why I'm putting all that on there. All right, so you have the login, and it looks like it's telling me right now I'm missing my it's telling me I'm missing my home page. So let's just create our home page. We know where it's going to be. We're going to follow the exact same pattern. So let's actually go create a home page, and we'll put it inside of views. And which one's, well, this one's the easiest one to copy. We'll replace that, but we will remember this time to rename it properly. So home page, and let's go inside of our home page, and we don't want anything. We just want to say to home page. All right, and let's see what we got going on here. All right, so our router is defaulting to the default route, which is our home page. And so now we can also take a look at some of our other pages that we were curious how they were coming along. So let's close this, and let's get back to looking at things. So let's look at our login page. And that doesn't look good. Let's go back to our router. I'm going to stop using this and start using my command P router. and take a look at my route page, home. The path is login. Okay. Let's see if we have some errors in here. Okay, here's the fun. Now we go. Is logged in is not defined in AuthStore. Is logged in is to define. So let's use my command P. AuthStore is logged in is defined. Oh, const. See if that gets us any better. Let's refresh. Let's move this down to the bottom. All right. Okay, it's just some other. So it can't run my login page. Can't read email because I haven't defined credentials. Let's go back to my login page. And we have our stores, but we haven't defined my credentials that are holding my email and password. So we're going to say, and so that got it past that. And then it's complaining up here because it's looking for the values. So we're just going to say bang, bang. So it should not be looking for it. And let's clear everything and refresh. And ref is not defined. So let's go up into our view. There's no view, so let's import ref from view. And stop, refresh. All right, so we have our lovely login page. So my login page is there. I have my do login, but on do login, we want to call AuthStore login. So we're going to take those values, and then we're going to call AuthStore.login. We're going to send it email and password. And this is an await. Make this async. And wrap it with a try catch. We have our error that will come back, and then we'll just alert error plus MESSAGE. We get an error message back from that. So it looks like our login page is set. And let's go to, because we're going to use, so let's see what happens when I go to create account. All right, and so now this is what I want for a create account, is we just want to be able to go through our step 1, our step 2, and then what we'll do is we'll take all this information and we'll use it to create an account. So since we're this far, let's go into our AuthStore, and we have our login function. Then we have our create account function. And our create account function is going to be more than, it's going to be email, password, first name, comma, last name, comma, birthday. Those are the values that we expect. And then we are going to use all these values to create an account. And async, and then we need to return the function create account. All right. So these are our 2 functions that we have in our store. I like to just have some space in there. So that's the user object, that's the is logged in, and then I also like to keep a separate object for the user profile, because this is going to be the auth user that comes back from Supabase, and this is going to be the profile information that's stored in a separate table, and then this is the login state. So let's say user, and then say user profile. All right. Just kind of cleaned it up and reorganized things. the next step, we're going to quickly go through setting up a Supabase project so that we can integrate the authentication and create account. And for this phase, we'll just put it directly in the store, but eventually we'll move it outside of the store into a separate file. But like I said, I just want to get it working. We'll get it working in this one. We'll write some tests in the next one, and then maybe refactor a bit. So let's get over to Supabase. Okay, we are back, and I'm in Supabase right now. I'm not going to go through setting up a project in Supabase. Honestly, once you create an account, you click the create new button, create new project, and it creates the project. I will include a link below if someone wants to watch step through a video. But so I've now created my database. Actually, I've created my whole project. This is the test project that I've used before. That's why you see some interactions already, but I'll kind of walk through the key parts of what we need. To set everything up, you're going to need your API key and your URL, and those are available under Settings, API, and you can see here is the URL, and here is the API key that you need to get access. It gives you a pretty good idea of, and also it gives you a pretty good idea of how to set everything up. So if we go to Authentication, one of the things is that we're using an email provider, and so we clicked on Authentication, we go to Providers, and email is enabled by default. But a change that I did have to make is this: when you first start the system up, this confirm email is always set to true, indicating that the users need to confirm their address before signing in. I turn that off, because otherwise, when you create the user, you need to send them an email, and then they need to respond to the email. For the purpose of this example, we're not going to do confirmation, so you make sure you go in to Authentication Providers and turn that off. All right? I don't need to save because that was the configuration that I made already. The other thing is, as I said, we're on Home, and then we need the project setting information and the API. And what we're going to use is the two things we need are the project URL and the API key. Also, they have nice documentation. We'll be using the JavaScript client. They show you how to install. I think I've installed it already, but let's just do it anyway to kind of show how it's done. It's just an npm install. You can find the window that's not being used. So let's go in here, paste, install Supabase. And as it says here, it's initializing. You need the Supabase URL and the Supabase key. And here is how you set up your client. We are going to, just so that you know, we're going to show how to put your client keys in a .env file. That's always important. I'm going to kind of keep this to the side so you don't see all my keys, but you need a file with .env, and then inside of it, you need to make sure that with Vite, you need to make sure you preface it with this Vite underscore and then the name of your key. That's the way it should be done. And then we're going to, in this pass, we're going to initialize Supabase inside of my AuthStore. So it's really just these two lines that you need. And so we'll just come up here in the top, and we will initialize Supabase. Not that. We'll copy these lines. All right. We'll paste them in here. Let's move this import up to where it belongs. Now, to use your keys, you have to say import meta env, and then your keys, and it's Vite dot Supabase URL, and then Supabase key. And then that's it, and then you have your client. And so let's make sure that this is getting started up correctly. So let's just console log out my client. Also, just to let you know, there's some other mods that in doing some research that I realized that I needed to make to, that's not client, it's Supabase, that I needed to make to get, because remember, we've removed TypeScript from everything. So that's the goal. So if we come back here, you needed to go into this tsconfig node.json and set allowed JS to true, and then your tsconfig here and allow JS to true. You need to make those changes. Okay, so now let's get our application running again. And let's see what we got in our console. We're hoping to see a Supabase log. Oh, I'm not here. This doesn't use the auth API, so login does. Login does use the AuthStore, so since it is using the AuthStore, it's going to initialize Supabase, which is what we want. And let's see if it got everything that it needed. And it did. So it has initialized Supabase. So now we can go back to our documentation, and that's how we initialized it. And then let's save this. Let's go back to our database. So this is our database, and it's nice because it has the documentation built in the database, not authentication. If you go down here to this document icon, you click docs. We've already done this part, which is install. We initialize the client, so let's go to user management, and there's user sign up, and then there's user login. We're going to focus on the user login first, so let's copy that user login code, and we'll go down here inside of our store, and we're going to paste that in there. And this is the sign in with password, and we need to provide an email and password. So the email and password will get passed in from the API call, and then we need to return the data that comes back or an error. So we're just going to return it, and since this is async, it will execute this, and then it will return the results of the sign-in back to the caller. We have down here exported it, so I have access to this call off of my store. So I'm going to close my .env, and I'm going to close my getIgnore because I know I don't need it. And so if I come to my login page here now, we already have imported the AuthStore, and then we call our use AuthStore, and then we come down here, and you can see I already have the function in place, email, password. It's complaining because I'm not passing in event, because I need to get event here. And the only way I get event is with the submit. And you remember I switched this to a do login, so what we're going to do is we're going to switch this type back to submit, and we still don't need this value, because since we switch it back to the submit, we're not using the credentials, so I apologize for leaving that in there. And then all we're going to do is, instead of calling handle submit here, we're going to call our do login. All right, so, and since we put the name on the input types, what should happen is that, so now that we switch this back and we're using the event, off of the event you'll get the target and the elements, and from the elements you get email and password. These two are refs, so that's why here to log out the output I have to say dot value on both of them to get the value. And so when passing them in to my login function, I need to also make sure that I pass the value in. Password.value. And then on my, this is my API call. And remember, it returns my response, which is data and value. Oh, sorry, data and error. And if we have an error, so if error, then throw the error so that it will get caught, and it will display the error here. Otherwise, we have a user. Let's just console log out the user so we know we have it. Let's just say data.user.email so we know we have the user. And then we are going to redirect to our home page. So, well, one, we could remove this credentials. We can also remove the wizard store because we're not using a wizard store in the login page. We are not using ref let's see, throw error console. We're not using ref, but we do need our router. So we'll do import use router from my Vue-Router. And then down here, after we log this, we will say router replace, and then we want it to go to the default route, which is home. So now when we run this, we should get an error because we haven't created any users yet, but it'll just test that we have the basics laid out. So login cannot destructure property data or intermediate value as it is null. So let's see, did I set up everything right? Oh, I never called, what? This is wrong. I want to call use router to get my router, so that was a mistake. Hold on. Const router equals use router. It was importing my router file, so now we have use router. And now let's see if we get a different result. Let's refresh. And invalid login credentials. So that's what we expected because we don't have a user. So now that we have our login or set up, let's hop over to our create account. And what we'll do is first we'll update our AuthStore. So let's go to our AuthStore. And what we will do is we will use the appropriate API call. So let's go back to our Supabase. Let's look in let's go back to the auth documentation, which we had down here, the API docs. So user management. Now let's take this user signup code, and we will copy it, and we will go down inside of here, our create account, and we're going to use the Supabase signup. Same as we did above here, we're just going to return the result. And because we are getting all this data, right now we're only going to use the email and password, because in the end our goal is to create a user profile table. And remember I said that the results from that will store in user profile. And so for now, all I need is the email and password that are passed in. So we can just remove that's code, and we remove those dummy values, save that, and so now we get the exact same behavior as above. It'll execute the call and it will return it. And we have it exposed here under create account right there. So, well, first let me add my create account button. So let's come up here into my login page, and let's add another button down here. And we're going to make sure this is set to type button. And it's going to be called create account. We're going to say on click, get our quotes right, router dot push create account. And so it is illegal in tags. Oh, my quote error. I have to use the single quotes in here. Okay, so on create account, let's get to, so now on my create account page, we will walk through the wizard and take all of this information in. So the wizard will still do what it's supposed to do, but here the email and password is really what we want. And then here, instead of saying next, here we'll actually say create the account. And what we'll do is we'll pass all the values over to our store. But for now, we're just going to take the email and password to actually call the API function to do the sign up or create account function in Supabase. So let's go to our summary. And let's change our next button to create account. And let's set our type button. And then on our click, do create account. Here's what we're going to call. And so we need to create our function. Do create account equals async And then in here, we're going to call our AuthStore. So let's get our AuthStore. That's going to come from use AuthStore, which was auto imported. And then off of use AuthStore, remember, we're going to follow the same pattern that we used in our login page. Let's take a quick pop back. And I'm just going to copy this to make it easier. Let's close the stuff we don't need. I don't need my create account page. I just need, let's close my tests. So my summary, and then inside of my do create account, we're not getting targets and elements. We're going to get this information from our wizard store. So up here, I'll just say store. And as you can see off of account info, it returns first name, last name, email, password, and birthday. So we'll just say store.account info. And it will destructure out and get us our email and password. Now we don't need to dump the values here because they're not refs. And so here, instead of my AuthStore login, I want to call my AuthStore create account, and I want to pass the email password in. Actually, what I can just do is, let's just change this. We'll just pass everything in for now. So if I remove this and I just tell it to destructure everything, so we just go like this, 1, 2, 3. That will send everything that's in account info as a parameter over to my create account. So let's remove this line. Kind of simplifies the code a little bit. Let's remove this line. And this AuthStore create account returns a user object. It's a little bit different. Oh no, it's the same. Data. Why is data.user? Oh, because it could be null. So let's check. And then user could be null. So let's check. And then we need to import our router because if successful, just like on the login, we want to redirect to our index, which is our home page. And type of error is unknown. That's okay. But I do need my router. So let's do router uter equals use router. And it got auto imported. Let's remove this lang ts from here because we're going without TypeScript. Okay, so make our create account call, pass in the appropriate variables, get our data back and our error back. If there's an error, throw the error and display it. If not, that means we successfully created the account. Display the email in the console log so we know that it worked, and then switch to the index page of the home page. Actually, let's go back to our store, because in our AuthStore, when we get past an email password, we want to do, what do we want to do here? When we pass in the email and password, we want to save the user that comes in, right? And so let's see if it has it in here in the JavaScript documentation. Find on. Okay. So there's this function or callback to receive a notification every time an auth event happens. And so what will happen is that when my login is successful, I will get this auth state change event will get fired. And see, so this listen to sign in. So when sign in happens, we will get the session information on the user. When sign out happens, we'll get sent the sign out event, and then we know it's signed out and we can clear the user. Those are the two we're just going to worry about for now. But what we can do, because on sign out, what happens is the session gets nulled out. So all we need to do is just listen to all auth changes. So let's take this. Because remember, what I want is once I get a user signed in, I want to make sure that my my state gets updated inside my store, and I want to set my user value right here. So up here under initialize and setting up my client, after my client's set up, I want to listen for auth events. So we'll paste this code in. And what we will do is if session, then we're going to assign our user. So we'll say user value is equal to session.user. So we'll get the user. Actually, we don't care what the session is, because what we'll do is, irregardless of the session, we'll take whatever the session value is. And if I have a session, so let's do this, session. If I have a session, assign the user value to the session. If I don't have a session, assign it to null. All right? And then the other thing is, since we're keeping track of is logged in, we can also set that here. So I can say is logged in is we can assign that based on my user.value. And the same thing, if I have a user value, then is logged in is true. Otherwise, it's false. There's a couple of ways you can do this, but just to kind of keep it simple, this is the approach that I'm going to take. So that sets our auth state changes. So what should happen now is I don't need to assign my user value on the login, and I don't need to assign it here on the sign up, because when the event is fired here, I will set my variable, my properties inside of my store. So let's go back to my database, and in my database, I click on my authentication. You can see I have no users. So let's try our create user. Let's refresh and put some data in. Next. I might make a couple of these, so we'll just say Aaron +1, and I believe, and we'll just set the password to password. And then next, and then you can see here's all my information, and then let's create an account. And I got here, so it looks like I created an account, and what we can do to see if we created an account is let's go to our home page. So we have our home page here, and what we want to display here is, let's say H2, and we don't need this anymore, but we do need our AuthStore, because what we want to do is we want to check our AuthStore. So const AuthStore equals use AuthStore. We're going to do some destructuring, and we want our account info. Use AuthStore. Off of the AuthStore, we want our user object, which is right there. So let's do user. We don't have any profile information yet. We'll get that later. So, and then off of our user, we have an email. So we can say user. So we'll say user.email. And so we have the email of my authenticated user. And then if I go into Supabase and I reload, we can see I have my user object in there. But then the other thing we're going to want to do to make sure all this works is let's put a button in here to log out. And then up here, const, and we auth. So also for AuthStore here, let's get our logout. Well, it looks like I don't have it, so we'll create that logout. So let's go hop back over to my AuthStore, and we're going to add a function. There's a login. Let's just put our logout right below it. And log LGT logout. Logout doesn't require any parameters, so we can get rid of this. And I believe the call is just sign out. Yes, it is. So sign out, and it takes no parameters also. And this will just return an error or null. So we'll get the results back. And let's go down here and add our logout. So remember, these are the functions and the properties we're exposing from our store. And we want, in our home page, we need that logout function. And so here we have our do logout, and inside of do logout, const auth. I already yes, I already have my AuthStore. So here I just want to call logout. Actually, it's just error we want. Let's set this to async. And all right, so the promise returns, an error as part of the object. So we'll do this. And if logout is successful, we need our router again because we want to redirect back to the login page. Import. Actually, let's use our auto imports so we don't have to figure it out ourselves. So let's just say here, router dot replace and redirect us to login. And that didn't do the right auto import. I have to, because I need to do, so if I do it this way, router equals use router, then I get my auto import, which is what I want. So now I can get rid of that and my router replace, and it should push us back to my login page. So let's go here. We're on logout. Oh, let's refresh to make sure we get everything. Do logout, await logout. And I threw an error. Let's see. Can I read null of reading email? Oh, because it's trying to read email up here on the page and I don't have a user object. So let's just do this. And can I do this? If user. It's another way to do that. So now I'm logged out and I'm back on my home page. And let's just refresh so we can see the whole process again. So if I log in, it takes me to my home page. If I log out, it's cleared. Let's log in again so we can take a look at what we have in our store. So let's go to our review tools. I'm going to spread this out. I don't know why I'm all the way over here anyway. So I'm going to open this up a bit so we can see some more of the information inside of our view tools. So if I come down to my home page, well, here you can see my user, which is coming from my AuthStore. So you can see my users there, and here's all the information I need in my signed in user. Okay, so you can see my user that I have here, and then when I log out and I come back to my login page, I have my AuthStore. My user is null, his login is false, and so everything has been cleared out. Okay, so we have the create account and we have the login working. But the other thing that we want to do is we now want to protect our routes. So what should happen is I should not be able to go to my index page. So if I click here, I should not be able to go to my index page because I don't have a user in my AuthStore. Now I could just go to my page and do a check at the top of every one of my pages and see if I have a user, and if not, redirect. But it's easier, and there's been functionality provided in the router to support that. So inside the router, after you have your routes and you create your router, off of your well, one thing you can do is you could come to your routes that need to be protected, and off of here you can put this code in, and so each route has this meta object on it, and off of this meta object I'm putting a property called requires auth. So this basically says that this route requires authentication. And I won't put it on any of these, so that means that these don't require authentication. So then when I come down to my router, I can say router before each, and you're passed in to, which is the route you're going to, from, which is the route you just left, and then this function next, which means if everything's okay, just move on to the next one. And we're going to keep this simple, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to check if I have a user, and to do that I need my AuthStore. So in here I can say use AuthStore, and then off my AuthStore I can see is logged in. And so that in my if statement, if not is logged in and my to route meta has this requires auth, then you need to go to the login page. And so I can just use my router object that I have and say replace whatever route you're trying to go to with login. Otherwise, next. So you saw already how it just refreshed because it's basically saying I don't have a user, so you cannot go to the home page. But after I log in, I can go to the home page because I have a user. Now what we want to fix is the fact is you notice that I just logged in, but my user's gone. Because if I go to look at my AuthStore got refreshed. There is a user object here, and it should have let me go. So let's see what happened. And so if I go to my console, you can see I'm getting my events fired, my signed in and my initial session, and then the AuthStore letting me know my AuthStore is installed. But the interesting thing is, and this is a problem that I ran into the first couple times I did this, if I go here and I say console log 2, just let me know the route that I'm going to. And then also, just let me know the route that I'm going to. You can see what happens. So if you look at the log, you can see that my router was hit before my Supabase client was initialized. And so that's why it's taking me to the login page, because the application doesn't know that I have a user already. So what we need to do is we need to find a way to make sure that we are not accessing the router until the Supabase client has had the opportunity to get initialized. And so an easy way to do this, well, there's a couple of ways to do this. A solution that I found that I've kind of stuck with, which is pretty straightforward and easy, is to just in my AuthStore create a function that checks to see if I have a user. And that function is a promise. So we'll wait for that promise to get resolved. And then if it's, let me show you some context. So p main. So I want to create my Pinia, associate Pinia with my app, use my Pinia, but I don't want to use my router until I know I actually have a user. So what we can do is we can say if use AuthStore dot initialized. Actually, we're going to make this a promise. So once it's initialized, and can I call await at the top level yet in Vue? Looks like I can. So let's go and create my initialize function. So let's go to my AuthStore. And what we're going to do inside of my AuthStore is, where will I put my function? Let's go down here after login. It seems a good place for it. So we'll say const initialized equals async. We're not passing any parameters in. And all we want to do is just get a user, or see it as a user. And I believe that there is this call, supabase.auth.get session. Can I get user? Gets the current user details if there's an existing session. So we'll just call that get user. And this returns a promise, which is a user response. And that returns a const, I believe. And this is a user. I believe a user response has a user in it. Oh, so this needs to be a wait. Let me do this just to make sure. Response, and then I can check and see response dot. Oh, it does the same thing, the data and the error, and then let's see, and then data has a user or not. So let's get this right. So let's change that. So we're going to go data dot error, and in here we're going to say if data, well, I guess the easy way to say if error return null, else return user dot, oh, no, that's a return data dot user, return the user. Actually, I don't want the user. We're just going to say if data.user, then return true. Actually, it doesn't really matter what I return, honestly, because once the promise is resolved, it's going to either load the router, or it's going to load the router, and then what will happen is that this auth state change will kick in. Because when I make this call to check if initialized, it's going to attempt to get the user. If there is a user, it will trigger my auth state change. This will assign my user value and assign that is user logged in, which is really what I need to happen. So let's now go up to, well, first of all, let's refresh this and see. Oh, initialize, I need to return. And now you can see my Supabase client happens. The sign-in happens, then the initial session happens, then I hit the router. And that's the path that I wanted it to take. So now if I try to just go to my index page, client hit, it says, yes, I have a token, it initializes a session, then I call my router says I have a user, so now I can get to my home page. If I log out, and so now I'm logged out, and let's try the same thing again. Client initialized, I have no session. It hits the router, it didn't work, the router redirects me. So this is the first call to try to go home, see what the index, then the next one is to go to login, and it goes to login appropriately. Then I log the user in. Here's my username and password. It says I'm signed in, and then it goes to the index route. So we're going to stop here because we're probably close to about an hour. And what we will do in the next video is we will add, in our create account, we will add the user profile object, so we can put the user profile object here on our store. We can save it here in user profile, and we'll add some tests for my AuthStore. Thanks, and we will see you on the next part.